Welcome to Growing Concern. What you were just witnessing there is the 47 deaths from an exploding, well, we call them bomb trains, but it was an oil train in Quebec on, I think it was July 6th of 2013. 47 people lost their lives. You saw there all their names right there, obviously all French names, and there was mothers and brothers and sisters and family members. This particular footage was shot in Portland at a rally on Monday, which was the anniversary. They were there to commemorate it. It was a horrible thing, and it's not maybe the worst thing that's happened with oil trains, but it's certainly not the only one. And the rally took place here in Portland, and there was it was actually covered on the Earth First Journal, and it was actually on Amy Goodman's show. She took a couple of pictures from what was going on here. But we're going to talk about why this happens and some of the aftermath of it. We're going to play some footage from the rally. Reverend Kate Laura will speak, and Bonnie McKinley, who incidentally helped to organize this along with Ted Gleichman, so I'll send a shout out to them. But we have two guests. On my far right, we have Lowen Berman, and then we have Chris Fountain. Both are with the Climate Action Coalition. We've had folks on from this before. We'll get that graphic up so you can go to their website and see what they're up to. But welcome to the program, both of you.
Thank you.
It's a somber occasion, but in some ways it's a good occasion because the word is getting out and people slowly are finding out that this is a dagger in the heart of America, along with the KXL pipeline and all the different things that they want of the oil, gas, and all the things they're trying to bring through Portland to mainly Asian markets. It's a terrible thing, and the folks that do this have no heart. There's a little video we might play a little bit later called 47 Hearts for the beating hearts that were stopped there in Quebec. It's like I said, there's so many words to be saying, but I think Lowen said that he could talk a little bit about what is going on, why this is happening, and I think the fact that they blew up doesn't really tell us anything.
No, I mean, people may see this as an accident. Accidents happen, but this wasn't an accident, this was a crime. And I could just mention some of what led up to it.
Sure.
The engine that was driving the train was defective and had gone into the shop, and rather than make a proper repair on it, they had just kludged together something using epoxy and sent it back out. So the night of the accident, the engine was spitting oil, smoking, pouring out black smoke. Sparks were coming out of the exhaust.
Before this happened?
Before it happened, while the train was 7 miles away. The train was then parked on an incline on the main line, which should not have happened, so that if the brakes failed, it would roll 7 miles into Lac Megantic. The brakes were not set. The train, and worst of all, the total staffing on this train of 72 oil cars containing explosive Bakken crude oil, the entire staff was one engineer. That's all they have on the train. And he was told to park the train and go to a hotel for the night and leave the engine running. Which he did, and the engine in turn supplied air to the air brakes to keep the train from moving. But what happened is the train caught fire from this defective engine. Fire department was called. They came out, put out the fire, but in so doing they turned off the engine. When they turned off the engine, that stopped the air to the brakes that was holding the train.
It was on an incline.
Which was on an incline. The engineer wanted to go back to the train after he heard about the fire, and the company told him no, he couldn't do that. So the train was just left. And as the air bled out of the brakes, it began to run. And after 7 miles, by the time it hit Lac Megantic, it was moving at very high speed. Most of the 72 cars derailed, exploded, pouring flaming oil into the sewer system, which came up all through the town, and most of the downtown was destroyed. So was this an accident? Well, no, because all of the rules that were broken, all of the safety things were broken, were not against the law. They were things that the rail company had instituted to save money. And because the rail companies have, as in the United States, enormous political control, they keep the federal government from making the kinds of safety regulations that would prevent things like this. So Lac Megantic was not an accident, it was an example or an indication of the way in which corporate power, interested only in profit, ignores the common good, keeps the government from serving the common good. And I think that our own situation here, the incident, the rally you mentioned was not downtown, it was at an oil terminal here in Portland. A lot of folks don't know that we have an oil terminal here in Portland, and that oil terminal is receiving the same Bakken oil crude that blew up at Lac Megantic, and the rail cars that we were in front of at the time of the rally were the same DOT 111 cars that blew up at Lac Megantic. Worst of all, of course, is that this lack of concern for the common good, this lack of effective government control of corporate power, leads inevitably to the kinds of not just disasters like this, but the huge disaster of climate change, which, whether this oil is burned up in an explosion or ends up being burned up as fuel in Asia, one atmosphere, one planet, it's all coming back to really present a threat to the very existence of our civilization, as well as the existence of hundreds of other species. And yet nothing is being done. It's being explained and warned about it over and over and over again, and nothing's happening. Why is that?
Because the media won't cover it correctly, I would say.
Well, part of it is the media, but even when the media covered it, when the Pope comes out and says it, and the whole world is listening, and the Pope says it's corporate capitalism, international capitalism, that is the cause of climate change and is the main impediment to meeting the challenge, nothing happens. And if nothing happens because of the power that the international corporations have of controlling the governments and the media. And so Lac Megantic is not an incident, it's an example of what happens on a very small scale, a tragic scale, but a very small scale of what's happening to all of us.
It sounds to me like it's at least reckless endangerment.
I would think so.
At least that. Well, you know, you have a lot of information there, and we'll probably get more of it in a minute. But I think that Chris is here because she's new at this. So you just recently found out a lot about this, and you've been inspired to try to lend your hand to the cause here.
Yes, I recently went on an extended trip to South America because I was thinking about moving there, and I went down there to see if I could find the right fit. I wanted to do something that was meaningful, and I went to explore there, and I kept thinking, there was in the back of my mind, there was this feeling that I really should be home doing something to save our country as opposed to going to another country. So I literally got off the plane and found out about the Pembina oil terminal, Pembina propane terminal that was to be put in right down the river from my house. Mm-hmm. And it affected me personally, but after thinking about it for a very short period of time, I realized that there was a whole lot more to it than affecting me personally because it was so close. And I started reading online about it and found a letter, an article that had been written by one of the members of the Climate Action Coalition, of which I am a member. And it was written by Daphne Weisham. And I was fascinated with what she was saying about this propane terminal. So I gave her a phone call, and she invited me to a meeting, and that was 4 months ago. And I have been very heavily involved ever since, learning so much. I mean, I was aware that there was a real problem with our climate, but I can't explain to you how much I've learned and how deep my feelings go towards this issue.
And now you're probably learning how, whether it's oil, gas, whatever, coal, how it is all connected together. And it's, the connecting point is, as Lowen says, it's corporate control, and corporate control of the legislative and, even the executive and judicial branches.
One thing I think it's important that people realize is that climate change can be dealt with. I mean, some damage has already been done, as we have experienced recently, and as other people around the world have experienced much more seriously, and many species have gone extinct. But we have the technology, if we applied it appropriately, to keep the worst of it from happening. But it would take the kind of mobilization that we saw during World War II. Us older folks can remember the pictures of the tanks and planes pouring off the assembly lines. Well, we need that same kind of mobilization, but with windmills and solar panels and so forth pouring off. And what's keeping it from happening? I mean, we knew during World War II that our way of life was being threatened, that our sons and daughters and husbands were dying, and we saw it as an immediate threat, and we mobilized and we did what we had to do, and we paid what we had to pay. Well, the threat from climate change is at least as great, and yet there's no mobilization. We hear, oh, this corporation, they're going to cut back 5% on their...
In 20 years.
In 20, greenwashing. Well, that's not what's needed. What's needed is a total social mobilization. And it could happen if we had the leadership from the government, from the powers that be, but that's not happening. And so the consequence, we're going to have to do it ourselves, like the civil rights movement, like the anti-war movement, like the labor movement. It's going to take masses of people turning out in large numbers, forcing change.
Sure.
And we can do it, though. I mean, that's one of the problems we face is the sense of despair that, well, there's nothing to be done. Germany gets half its power right now from sustainable energy sources. It's not impossible. We have the technology, and if we put the kind of money into developing new solutions that we put into the Manhattan Project, we could do that much more.
Sure. I know a lot of that mobilization that happened during the World War II, half of that was the willingness of the people to sacrifice.
Right.
And do without gasoline, do without new cars every year. And no one's asking us, like George Bush says after 9/11, no, don't worry, go shopping. That's the same kind of attitude we're getting now.
But we need victory gardens, and we need gas rationing,
sure,
and we need free public transportation, and we need every building in Multnomah County to be insulated. We need to count not only the CO2 that we produce here, but the CO2 that's produced from all the stuff we consume, and realize what a cost we are imposing on the rest of the world.
Sure. Well, we've gone on for 15 minutes or so now. I think we should hear a little bit from Kate Lohr, who is a reverend with the First Unitarian Church here in Portland. She's a powerful speaker and a wonderful lady, and she goes, I don't know, 8 minutes or something like that. Then we'll come back.
Reverend Kate Lohr, we are so glad you're with us today, because she is, for 17 years, she's led the First Unitarian Church's social justice program. And I just read this yesterday. She doesn't talk about any of these things, but in 2013, she received an award from the NAACP and from the Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon for her leadership in social justice. And she led a contingent of UUs last summer to Washington, D.C. for the People's Climate March. So we're so happy that she's here in our town, Reverend Kate Lohr.
Thank you, Emily, who in herself is a great leader of our environmental group. Would you hold that sign for me? residents in the Quebec town of Lac Megantic described the scene after the oil train derailed and then exploded there 2 years ago. They said that the burning petroleum was like a wall of fire, or a river of fire. The blaze, which burned for 36 hours, sent flames and smokes hundreds of feet into the air. At one point, the fire was pulling in so much oxygen that the trees were blowing around as if there was a tropical storm. That's how intense it was. You should probably know the explosions and fire destroyed some 40 buildings and killed 47 people. We hold their names today. Most of these folks were enjoying live music at a popular cafe. Now, wooden homes along the lake shore burned from the inside out as the fire erupted out of the water pipes, drains, and sewers, and a 48-inch storm pipe that runs from the train yard to a nearby river became a conduit for this dirty fossil fuel, spewing flames and oil for more than a half of a mile into the river. It was a tragedy of incredible magnitude, bringing untold suffering to the friends and family of these people and to all of the beings in the nature that surrounds this area. And that's why we're here today, to mourn these losses still deeply felt after 2 years since the quote-unquote accident. But it really wasn't an accident, was it? It was a preventable disaster. You see, the oil moving through Lac Megantic was mislabeled. It was labeled as a packing group 3 instead of a packing group 2 or 1, which refers to much more dangerous substances with lower flash points. And the train was carrying the most volatile oil to be had, oil from the Bracken Shale fracking fields. Moreover, a hazardous materials inspection team had issued safety warnings about these oil trains back in 2011 and 2012, but no changes have been made to the tank cars since then. Even as federal regulators discuss new safety measures, updating or retrofitting the standard petroleum tank cars, reducing train speeds near towns, and performing spot inspections of oil trains, continue to roll through towns and cities across the United States and Canada. In fact, instead of reducing the train loads until proper safety methods can be put into place, the quantity of oil being shipped by rail across North America has been increasing dramatically. And yes, most of it is this same hyper volatile oil that killed our brothers and sisters to the north. According to the American Association of Railroads, there were 9,500 rail cars carrying crude oil in 2008. Now there are close to 500,000 of them shipping oil in outdated cars, on tracks that are rarely inspected, and through towns and cities ill-equipped to deal with disaster. It comes as no surprise then that since the Lac Megantic disaster there have been a string of oil train collisions and derailments with no sign of abatement. Oil trains continue to pass through major cities, small towns, and national parks. Public safety is clearly being trumped by fossil fuel profiteering. Now, oil companies know their days are numbered, but they want to make as much profit as possible, no matter how many lives are sacrificed, no matter how many ecosystems are destroyed. And so they do it without any public input, and in many cases, even our emergency response teams don't know when they're coming through. But today, we are here to say that this has got to stop. 10 to 12 oil trains are coming through the Pacific Northwest every day. It's just a matter of time before we have our own disaster, unless we stop these trains. We, the people, need a moratorium on new oil train infrastructure. And we, the people, in honor of all these lives that we see today, we need to stop the fossil fuel industry, and we've got to stop these trains. So in closing, I would ask that you just take a moment to enter that place of deep reverence. Some of you know it as meditation. Some of you know it as prayer. O Spirit of life and future generations, we recognize that the stakes are very high. We understand that power concedes nothing without a demand. And so we ask that you make us strong enough to confront the threats we now face, strong enough to maintain our hope and our fortitude, strong enough to remember that we are not isolated beings but held together in mystery and miracle by the web of life. Be with us now and forevermore. Amen.
Going to have Bonnie McKinley speak next, read a letter from a resident of the town, Lac Megantic. And Bonnie has been an inspiration to many of us here. She's been the leader of the KXL group and one of the founding members of the Climate Action Coalition that is sponsoring today's event. Bonnie?
Thank you all for coming to today's commemoration. I'm going to read a letter from Jacques Gangon. He's a mechanic of Lac Megantic, and he, as you know, mechanics are very concerned about the way things work, and he is too, and he's a very keen observer of how the oil trains and the industry is working. Here's his letter. Greetings to all. During the week to commemorate the railroad tragedy in Lac Megantic, I want to send greetings to all those who struggle to reduce the use of fossil fuels, particularly to those who work to stop the bomb trains. I want to speak to the situation in Lac Megantic. 2 years after the derailment of the MMA train, our downtown still resembles a battlefield. All the buildings that were saved on the night of July 6, 2013 were demolished this winter. The immense trenches that were dug still contain soil contaminated by crude oil. Train service was the first thing to come back to normal here. Our observations have shown that the state of the rails is still unacceptable. The CMQ company that owns the rail line that runs from Montreal, Quebec to St. John's, New Brunswick, recently improved the situation by having the propane trains reduce their speed to 10 kilometers per hour when they were coming through our town. The municipal government has proposed a reconstruction plan that divides the population so that the most beautiful places are reserved for commercial tourism. In any case, the struggle continues. I want to thank all those in America who continue the work of resistance. I am especially pleased to see that the First Nations are involved in this struggle. Theirs is a very important force. I look forward to the great success of the multiple actions that have been organized around this vital cause. On the 5th of July, we will march to stop the oil trains coming to Lac Megantic. We will march to affirm our disagreement with the restart of the transportation of Bakken crude oil that is scheduled to begin in 2016. Solidarity, Jacques Gangon, citizens, Lac Megantic region. Thank you, Bob.
All right, we're back. some important things that Kate was saying there. You know, and as Lowen was saying, to paraphrase him, you know, if the people lead, the government will follow. And there are a lot of people trying to lead us down a more sustainable road, and we're not having a lot of luck, but the technology is getting better all the time for the wind and the solar. And I think as time goes on, if we keep pushing, this may come about. A lot depends on it, and as also I think it was Lowen that said, it isn't just us. It's also the total biosphere of the planet, but an individual species are suffering from humankind as well. And so we'll move along. We have a little bit more of a video in a while, but until we get to that, I think that Chris had something she wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I wanted to address what happened after this activity. We put the photographs, a couple of photographs, up on our Facebook page, and many of the residents of Lac Megantic actually answered or put a comment into the Facebook page, many of them in French. And I was in charge of making the black signs that you saw with the names and the ages on the cards. And so I became quite familiar with the names of the people who perished. And a lot of the emails carried the same last name. Yeah, and they were extremely grateful for the action that we took, and that we remembered them, and that we stand in solidarity with the people in Canada who are in the same, we're in the same kind of danger that they are, and they appreciate that, and so we're trying to join together with our friends to the north.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the situation is dire. I mean, whether it's the KXL pipeline or the various coal trains, or coal trains maybe not explode, but I think that's a possibility. But they poison the air with the dust, which just goes everywhere, and they can't cover them up because then they can explode. It's terrible, and I recognize a couple of the last names. LaPointe was one, and Turcotte was another. I've known people with that last name, and it's just it's unbelievable. The one thing I remember I thought was the first thing that was replaced was the tracks and the trains then.
Yep.
And so what happened with all the other things? I mean, all the people's homes, and you familiar with any of that follow-up, Lowen?
Well, as he said in the letter, the downtown still looks like a war zone, and there were a lot of buildings that were not burned, but they were all contaminated by the oil and the smoke, and they've all been torn down. Mm-hmm. And so now they're planning a new development, but the new development is all based on the idea of commercial development, not replacing the homes and the old town that once was there for the people who lived there. And again, it's a matter of the priorities not being what is good for the people, what is good for these people who have suffered so much and who lost so many people, but how can we make business better? Mm-hmm. And it's just a tragedy that we live in a world which has so much capacity to live in a sustainable and just way. And instead, we're constantly faced with increasing polarization in terms of income, increasing destruction of the natural world, loss of species, and so forth. And it's not necessary. It's not a law of nature. It's our choices. And the choice that we have made to move towards a system based on greed and on constant growth in a finite world is leading us to really disaster. I'm 73 years old. Before the worst of the climate crisis hits, I'm going to be pushing up daisies, as my mama used to say.
But your kids and grandkids.
But I got kids, yeah. And it's not just my kids, it's all of the world's kids. And what kind of a world are we leaving them? And so what we really need to do is come together and say enough is enough. We have to find a different way. And there's nothing that I could say that would be as eloquent as the Pope's statements that he made. And so it's not some crazy fringe that thinks that the problem is the economic system. And it's really important that on the one hand people pay attention to the science and to the, I mean, there's not a week that goes by that we don't get new, more dire predictions. Last week it was the oceans warming and acidification, and the view that the ocean warming may be even worse than the air warming in terms of its impact. But at the same time, not to say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, it's just too big, it's too terrible, we can't do anything, because we can. There's still time, and we have the technology, but it would take a tremendous change in our culture and our economic system. Mm-hmm. And it's not enough to do the kind of greenwashing that we're seeing all over. It really is going to take basic change, and I'm just hoping that people come to understand that and come together despite whatever differences they have out of a common need just to survive.
Mm-hmm. What it's going to take is a whole paradigm shift. It isn't you just got to change, so to speak, where your arm or your leg or your head is postured. It's going to take a whole change in stance of how we relate to the planet. Much in the way of how, let's say, the indigenous peoples are related to it. They considered it to be a living thing, and so they conducted themselves towards each aspect of it like it was a living thing. And we have a lot to learn from these so-called primitive peoples, because actually I think our conduct is more primitive than theirs. It seems like in the long run.
Jim, when we were working to stop the Pembina propane terminal in the Oregonian, there was a video that was published, and it was an aerial view of Portland and where the train tracks run through Portland. And what I feel is that people really need to wake up and realize how these combustible fuels are coming through our towns and putting so many of us in danger. There needs to be a way to really increase the awareness of these problems, because we all are living in a blast zone. Anyone who lives in a city is in a blast zone.
Mm-hmm. And the role that we have in the Pacific Northwest is critical, because what's happened is that the fossil fuel companies up in Canada and Alberta and here in North Dakota and so forth are using these what they call extraordinary means to get to the oil, meaning they're doing terribly destructive things which are both destructive to the earth immediately in fracking and in the tar sands.
Yeah.
And also put off an awful lot of carbon just in the taking the oil out. But they got to get it to a market, and the only way they can get it to market now is through the Pacific Northwest, because it's the Asian market, which is the big market. And so there are, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact name, but about 15 or more proposed terminals for coal, oil, and natural gas all along the Pacific Northwest coast that they want to build. And if they can't build it, they can't get this stuff out of the ground, which is what we want. Leave it in the ground. Mm-hmm. That's the only place that's safe for it. And here in Oregon, and in Portland, right across the river, we have the Tesoro Savage plan to build a huge oil terminal right in downtown Vancouver, which the city of Vancouver has opposed, but the state is still allowing so far. And in Oregon, we have a natural gas pipeline to go all the way 232 miles across Oregon to Coos Bay, where they're going to build a huge natural gas export terminal.
The LNG.
The LNG terminal. And that terminal, by the way, is being built at the end of a runway. If they get to build it.
Might as well just plant a target on it, huh?
Yeah. But 232 miles of pipeline going through wilderness areas and across private property, and the rural folks, the farmers, the landowners are opposed to it. But what's happening is they're moving towards declaring that this is a matter of eminent domain, where they will take it from these folks whether they want it or not. Mm-hmm. And eminent domain is supposed to be used for the common good. Well, the only good that's going to come out of this is profits for foreign corporations and a handful of jobs. And the idea that there's a conflict between jobs and climate sustainability is crazy. Can you imagine how many jobs it would take to put a couple of hundred offshore wind generators off the Oregon coast to, as I said earlier, insulate every house in building in Portland, to build a whole new public transportation system. I mean, there's again, during the war, World War II, there was no unemployment, there was no job shortage because so much had to be done. That's when women came into the workforce because they needed labor. Well, the same thing would happen if we would just transition our resources, instead of to exporting fossil fuels, into building a sustainable energy system. Nothing is keeping us from doing it except the power of corporate money.
Sure. Well, you know, I was just going to suggest a way that we could spend a lot of money on research and development on alternative fuels, is if we just quit giving oil companies and these companies that are showing millions and billions of dollars in profit, take away their subsidies and put that money there. When we're given an incredible amount of money, I think, even to Exxon and these places that turn around and owe billions of dollars because of the spills of the different accidents that have happened. And it isn't just the energy companies. We're giving subsidies to many companies that are showing profit. Put that money back into.
Sure. I mean, if we had a Manhattan project to develop artificial photosynthesis, for example, you know, the amount of money that's spent on renewable and sustainable energy development is a tiny fraction of what's spent on destructive production. And it's crazy. It makes no sense from the viewpoint of the average person. It only makes sense from the viewpoint of corporate profit.
Corporate board of directors.
And it's not the people who are I mean, they're wonderful people who work for Intel or even Exxon, good people who care about their communities and so forth. But the logic of the system locks them in to being forced to only concern themselves with the bottom line.
What's right in front of them.
And only concern themselves with the next 6 months, you know. And I know people who have just quit big jobs because they couldn't stand it anymore, because they just see the cognitive dissonance between caring about the world and people and what they're forced to do every day at work.
Well, speaking of money that's being spent on this, I recently learned that there have been billions of dollars spent to promote climate denial, which is another thing that stands in the way of us moving in the right direction.
Just muddy in the water. Yeah, they act like it's not decided yet. If you listen to Fox, once in a while I'll turn on Fox just to see what's going on. And sometimes they've got some decent coverage, and sometimes, well, they got those people on there that are just trying to glare and muddy up the waters. And what does Jim Hightower say? We can't clear things up until we get the pigs out of the water.
Well, you know, we don't have to go to Fox News. We can go to the Oregonian. And the Oregonian's positions on climate change, their editorial positions, are totally irrational, totally bizarre, and are being presented in the only large paper we've got as rational thought. And again, why is it that so many Americans still are unsure as to whether or not climate change is real or it's human caused or so forth? It's because, again, of corporate control of media, corporate control of education, corporate control of government. And you don't have to be a brain surgeon to know that when you look at a scientific consensus of 98 and 99%, we get on an airplane every day that we fly, and we don't question whether that plane's going to meets the rules of aerodynamics, because we trust the technicians and the scientists and so forth.
Yeah,
we trust them about almost everything. When we go to the doctor, we trust that they have, you know, good medical research. When we go across a bridge, we trust that the engineers know what they're doing. But somehow, the climate scientists don't know what they're doing. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. And it's only money and power and corporate power that allow this misinformation to become mainstream.
Sure. Well, that's the first rule. When you don't have any proof, you attack the messenger. That's exactly what they're doing. Now we're down to about 16, 17 minutes here, and we've talked for quite a while about the issue here, but we really haven't mentioned much about your organization and the fact that it's a coalition. You say you had a list of a lot of organizations that belong.
Yeah, the Climate Action Coalition currently consists of 10 member organizations, and those include the PDX Bike Swarm, the First Unitarian Church, the Community for Earth within the church, 350 PDX, the Portland Raging Grannies, Our Children's Trust, Sustainable Energy and Economy, the Sustainable Energy and Economy Network, Portland Rising Tide, No KXL from Portland, and our newest member is Healing Our Planet Earth, or HOPE, Hope, which they began in Southwest Portland as an offshoot of the faith-based climate-concerned group Beyond Fossil Fuels.
Oh, I've heard that. Healing Our Planet Earth. That's great hope. I love that. Well, that, obviously then this Climate Action Network or Climate Action Coalition is a local group, but some of those groups you mentioned, at least 350 PDX has a international 350.org, and I'm sure there's a lot of organizations, institutions, and nationally and worldwide, because this what's going on, what went on in Quebec and the dangers there, and what's coming up to Columbia Gorge with the oil and the gas and all that, you know, that's going to affect the planet. It's not just going to affect what's going on around here. Even if they never explode, they're going to be, like you mentioned earlier, they're going to go overseas and burn, and the Earth, for those who don't know, the Earth does spin, and it's just going to come right over here. So it might be a good time. Well, we talked about what happened back in Quebec. Lac Megantic, I'm going to get that eventually here. My French, I've never had much to do with the French language. We have a little clip here. It's about a 13-minute clip, but the first 2 minutes of it shows some of the devastation that happened. And just picture downtown Portland, or picture, you know, northeast where a lot of these trains come through, or it could very well happen here.
Eliane Parenteau, 93, widow, former owner of the local supermarket, lived near the track. Wilfried Ratch, 77.
All right. I'd love to play that, to see these the pictures, the images of these folks that lost their lives. They were just going about their daily lives, and it just, hopefully it ended quick. May not have for some of those folks. Didn't you say there was a wedding party or something?
It was a birthday party for one of the people who died. And it was late at night, and they were having a party and a dance, and that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's why so many younger people were involved. There were more than half of the people were under the age of 40. So it's particularly tragic, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got the phone. We haven't put the phones up for a while. If anybody wants to call up and discuss this, ask questions, or tell us how much you love oil trains, it doesn't really matter. We just need to have community interrelations about these issues, and that's how this is going to get taken care of. But while we're waiting for that to happen, you said you were going to talk a little bit about the coalition? Yeah,
the Climate Coalition, Climate Action Coalition. I'd like to talk a little bit about the mission of the Climate Action Coalition. We are an alliance of community-based organizations dedicated to confronting the causes and effects of climate change. Through nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience, grassroots organizing, and public education, we strive to unite and enable all communities to achieve climate justice. As the current West Coast climate crisis issue is the attempt to export large volumes of fossil fuel, we are concentrating on preventing the formation of fossil fuel export terminals. And I also just wanted to say that I encourage anyone who has any feelings, personal feelings about this issue, to become active in fighting it. And I am living proof that you don't have to be an expert on climate change to be an effective activist.
You just have to have passion, you know. I think, what is it, perspiration is half of inspiration, or whatever that talk is. To have that strong feeling is probably the most important part.
And you know, this concept of climate justice, which again the Pope has spoken eloquently about, the people who are suffering the most from climate change and all the associated things with it are the people who contributed the least to it. So that what's happening is that it's people, the poorest people in the world, the people in the most vulnerable communities, and the people in the United States who are living near the rail lines and suffering from the coal dust and so forth, are almost always people who have contributed the very least to the problem of climate change, but who suffer the consequences the most. And part of the explanation for why nothing's happening is because the folks who have the most power, have the most wealth, and are least impacted, initially at least, by climate change. Now, some of them have convinced themselves that with their wealth and their gated communities that they're going to be safe from the climate, but nobody's going to be safe from the effects of climate change. The destruction of agriculture, the rising sea levels, the destruction of the ocean wildlife, the loss of bees who pollinate the crops, the movement of tropical diseases north as the temperature changes. I mean, it's just one thing after another, and no one should feel that they or their families are going to be immune or are going to be spared. On the other hand, as I say, the worst thing that you could do is to say it's too big, it's too terrible, there's nothing I can do. There's plenty to be done, and it can be done, and it just means mobilizing folks.
And like I'm always fond of saying, the reason why the corporations are able to do what they do to us is to the extent that we do not conduct ourselves as a community. If we conduct ourselves as a community, they would have never got the power, because they kind of went behind our backs and, you know, got Congress to do this and that, and little by little, incrementally, they've got the power, and they're continuing down that road to where they want to have rights of free speech. Money is free speech. They've got rights for free speech. They've got rights of privacy. There's corporations that have stopped flyovers of government bodies of some kind that wanted to fly over and see what was going on there. They've stopped it. They have all these powers, little by little.
Well, part of things like the TPP and the earlier trade agreements gives corporations the power to stop local governments from addressing climate change because it interferes with international trade. And that's just another example of why to oppose these, along with the labor standards and the environmental standards and so forth.
That's well put. That's right.
But you know, the issue of mobilizing people to oppose this corporate power is not, again, to demonize the people in the corporations. They themselves are locked into a logic within their system which doesn't allow them to do anything else. So what we need to do is not change the personnel. What we have to do is change the system.
That's right, the behavior.
And that means putting more power in the hands of local communities, more power in the hands of government, more power in the hands of community experts, and reducing the power and the logic of the system that says that the only way to organize society is around greed and private profit, because we've seen where that's led. It's led, on the one hand, to, hey, I got an iPhone. You know, tremendous technological advances, but at what cost? Eventually at a cost of the destruction of the whole ecosystem and the destruction of all of us. So we can't allow the fact that things seems to have worked in the past in terms of producing more stuff stand in the way of our recognition that the stuff is going to kill us.
And a lot of this technology, you know, we haven't even really mentioned it too so far, but you mentioned the cell phones and all the computers. It uses an incredible amount of pure water in order to clean, and the chemicals in order to clean those chips. And our water is just being depleted so quickly that the technology is just going to expand that, and we're pumping it out of the ground, and it isn't you know, filled up very fast. And as you were talking about that, I remembered that SCOTUS, or Supreme Court, just hamstringed the EPA. I didn't get a chance to read much about that, but it had to do with air quality. It cut their legs out from underneath them in some ways of dealing with the air quality. So that's a good example, you know, of what you were talking about, where they control the government. The government does not control them. I know Jefferson, his whole thing was to control the corporations. Back then they were only allowed to live for 5 years. They weren't allowed to own another corporation. Things were a whole lot different back then. And little by little, you know, ever since the decision of somebody versus a railroad, they managed to get on board and incrementally take all the rights of a person. And our Supreme Court's all for it.
You know, we need to develop a system, and there's lots of folks who have lots of good ideas about it. It's not like, again, that nobody knows what to do, but we need to have systems in place in which the common good is the measuring device, whereby new technologies and new construction and new fuels and so forth are measured. Are these in the common good? And that doesn't mean that we try and control every aspect of people's lives. I mean, we know some of the terrible things that have happened in the past when governments become totalitarian. I'm certainly not advocating that. But a different organization of society in which the common good becomes the highest value, and individual freedom is also important, as opposed to making money. You know, and it may mean that we have to slow down technological development, but we've got the technology we need.
Sure.
We want to keep moving forward, but we want to move forward in a way that is congruent with human and other species needs, so that we could still be here in 100 years, in 1,000 years.
Well, let's hope. Let's just sure hope. But I'm sure glad that you brought up that whole idea of the climate justice, because, you know, like you say, a lot of the poorer folks that are living along the tracks, that's basically a form of racism, environmental racism, and it's also class war. When you talk about class war, people don't think about that, but the class war is not against the people that have. It is usually going on against the people that do not have. And that's exactly what's going on in this situation here. So we're down to about a little over almost 2 minutes here. Well, I want to thank you both for coming on. I want to thank you, Chris, for bringing your passion and your inspiration. Is there any inspiring words you have for those out there? Because I know a lot of people would agree with this, but maybe they don't do anything.
This has really changed my life. Being active with this coalition makes me more aware of how I live every day and trying to be a little more conscious. And if everyone could just take a small step forward, I think we'd be getting on the right track a lot more quickly, as long as everyone takes steps to participate.
Mm-hmm. Basically, it's just like with anything else. It's just like look around and pay attention to where you are and the effects of what you do is having. How about you there, Lowen? You have any final? You've had a lot to say.
I talked too much already, but
you had a lot to say, and you nailed it. You hit the nail on the head.
For me, I've been an activist for a long time, since high school, and to me, these are not separate issues. The issue of racism, the issue of labor strife, the issue of women's rights, the issue of gay and lesbian and transgender rights, they all have the same common theme, the same common values of love, respect, concern for one another, and working collectively and collaboratively in the common good and in common interest. So these aren't separate movements.
Not at all.
And we're hoping that the climate movement is not seen as an environmental movement, but part of an international social justice movement.
Right. Well, we were down to 15 seconds. I want to thank Frank Mahoney for that video that we did at the beginning of the program, and Rick Rappaport for the great images that are going on behind us, and the guests, of course. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.